The fluorescent lights of the Riverside County Courthouse buzzed with an irritating hum that matched the anxiety thrumming through Detective Sarah Martinez's chest. She stood behind the two-way mirror of the Victim Services office, her coffee growing cold in her hand, as she watched the smallest witness she'd ever encountered in her 15-year career. 3-year-old Emma Rodriguez sat perfectly still on an oversized plastic chair, her legs dangling several inches from the floor. Her knuckles were bone-white as they gripped a tattered stuffed rabbit, gray fur worn smooth from years of desperate hugging. The child's eyes stared at nothing, seeing everything, trapped somewhere between the present and that terrible night 43 days ago. "Anything?" Prosecutor David Kim asked, stepping beside Sarah. His tie was already loosened, though it was only 9 in the morning. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. This case was eating him alive. "Nothing," Sarah replied, her voice heavy with defeat. "Not a word, not a sound. Patricia's been in there for 20 minutes and Emma hasn't even blinked." Through the glass, they watched Patricia Chen, the county's most experienced child trauma specialist, sitting cross-legged on the floor. She'd brought coloring books, stuffed animals, puppets, every tool in her considerable arsenal. Nothing worked. Emma existed in a bubble of silence, unreachable, locked away in whatever dark place traumatized children go when the world becomes too terrible to bear. "The trial starts in 6 days, David said, running his hand through his hair for the 100th time that morning. "Marcus Rodriguez's attorney is already filing motions to dismiss, without Emma's testimony." "We have Sophia's testimony," Sarah interrupted, but her voice lacked conviction. "Which the defense will tear apart. Victims biased. History of reconciling with her abuser. They'll paint her as vindictive, trying to destroy her husband in a custody battle." David's jaw clenched. "We need Emma. She's the only completely credible witness to what happened that night." Sarah turned away from the window, unable to watch anymore. The child's silence was somehow louder than screaming. She was 3 years old, David. 3. She watched her father beat her mother unconscious and then choke her until she stopped moving. Emma thought her mother was dead. She hid in that closet for 4 hours before we found her, holding that rabbit, waiting for the monster to find her. "I know," David whispered. "God, I know." The door to the observation room opened, and Judge Margaret Sullivan entered, her black robe swishing. At 63, she'd seen everything a courtroom could offer, but even her weathered composure showed cracks around the edges. "How is she?" the judge asked, though the window told the story. "The same," Sarah replied. "We're running out of time and options." Judge Sullivan studied Emma for a long moment. The child hadn't moved, hadn't fidgeted, hadn't done any of the normal things 3-year-olds do. She just sat, holding that rabbit, lost somewhere adults couldn't follow. "I received an unusual request this morning," the judge said slowly, "from Officer Rachel Morrison. She works with the K-9 unit, but she has a different specialty. She wants to bring her facility dog to meet Emma." David frowned. "A police dog? That'll terrify her more." "Not a police dog. A facility dog. There's a difference." Judge Sullivan pulled out a file folder. "Officer Morrison's dog, Kane, is specially trained to work with traumatized witnesses, particularly children. He's been doing this work for 5 years. According to these statistics, 73% of the children Kane has worked with have successfully testified." Sarah's eyebrows rose. 73%? How is that even possible? "Apparently, traumatized children often find it easier to trust animals than adults. The dog provides a sense of safety, unconditional acceptance. No judgment, no pressure, just presence." The judge looked back at Emma. "Morrison has a 90% success rate specifically with children who have witnessed domestic violence." "When can she get here?" David asked immediately. "She's downstairs with Kane right now. I wanted your approval before I made it official." Through the window, Patricia was giving up. She stood, her shoulders slumped, and gently touched Emma's hand. The child didn't respond. Patricia gathered her materials and quietly left the room, closing the door with a soft click that somehow sounded like defeat. "Bring them up," Judge Sullivan said. "At this point, what do we have to lose?" 10 minutes later, Sarah watched through the window as the door opened again. She expected to see a police officer in uniform with a large German shepherd, something intimidating and official. Instead, Officer Rachel Morrison entered wearing plain clothes, jeans, and a simple blue shirt, and beside her walked the most gentle-looking golden retriever Sarah had ever seen. Kane wasn't massive or intimidating. He was medium-sized, with a soft golden coat and the warmest brown eyes imaginable. He wore a service vest that read "Facility Dog" in simple letters. But it was his demeanor that struck Sarah most. The dog moved with purpose but without urgency, with confidence but without aggression. He was calm personified. Rachel Morrison didn't approach Emma. She simply sat down on the floor about 6 feet away from the child and let Kane sit beside her. They waited, patient, unthreatening, just existing in the same space. For 3 full minutes, nothing happened. Sarah found herself holding her breath. Then, so slowly that Sarah almost missed it, Emma's head turned. Just a fraction. Just enough that her eyes could see the golden dog sitting quietly across the room. Kane didn't move, didn't bark, didn't do anything except exist with a peaceful presence that somehow filled the entire room. Emma's grip on her rabbit loosened, just slightly. Her lips parted and a sound escaped, not a word but a breath, a sigh that carried 43 days of held tension. "My God," David whispered beside Sarah, "is she?" Emma's small hand released the rabbit. It fell to her lap, forgotten for the first time since that terrible night. Her hand reached forward into the empty air, toward the dog she couldn't quite touch from where she sat. Rachel Morrison noticed. She stood slowly and looked at Kane. "Go ahead, boy." The golden retriever stood and walked forward with measured steps. He stopped directly in front of Emma's chair and sat again, waiting, always waiting for permission, never demanding, never taking, just offering. Emma's tiny hand trembled as it extended toward Kane's head. When her fingers touched his soft fur, something broke inside her. Her shoulders, rigid for 43 days, relaxed. Her eyes, dead and staring, filled with tears. Her mouth opened, and though no words came yet, everyone watching knew they just witnessed something miraculous. A door had opened. A bridge had been built. And on the other side of that bridge waited justice, truth, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of healing for one very small, very brave little girl. Detective Sarah Martinez wiped her own eyes. "Get Marcus Rodriguez's attorney on the phone," she said to David. "Tell him we're ready for trial." Because Emma Rodriguez had just found what every victim needs most, a reason to trust again. Officer Rachel Morrison had learned long ago that silence could be the loudest cry for help. As she sat in her patrol car outside the Riverside County Courthouse, she ran her fingers through Kane's golden fur and whispered the same prayer she'd spoken 73 times before. "Let us be enough." Kane looked up at her with those impossibly wise brown eyes, his tail thumping once against the seat. 5 years they'd worked together. 5 years of broken children and shattered families. 5 years of watching miracles happen in the spaces between human words and canine compassion. "This one's different, boy," Rachel said softly, checking Kane's service vest one more time. 3 years old. Hasn't spoken since the night she watched her father nearly kill her mother. The prosecutor says she's the key to putting a monster away, but Rachel's voice caught. "She's just a baby, Kane. Just a baby who shouldn't have to carry this weight." Her phone buzzed, a text from Judge Sullivan. "Whenever you're ready, no pressure, just hope." Rachel took a deep breath and stepped out of the car. Kane followed, his movements fluid and purposeful. They'd done this dance dozens of times, but each case carried its own gravity. Each child held their own unique brand of pain, and each one deserved every ounce of patience and love that Rachel and Kane could offer. The courthouse security guard, Miguel Torres, smiled when he saw them. "Morrison, heard you were coming in today. Another tough one." "Aren't they all?" Rachel replied, signing in at the desk. "Yeah, but this Rodriguez case," Miguel shook his head. "My daughter's 3, I can't even imagine." He reached down to pat Kane's head. "You work your magic, buddy. That little girl needs you." As they walked through the courthouse corridors, Rachel's mind drifted back to the day she'd first met Kane. She'd been a regular patrol officer, burning out fast from the endless cycle of domestic violence calls, watching victims recant their statements, seeing abusers walk free, knowing the cycle would continue until someone died. Then she'd attended a conference on trauma-informed justice and learned about facility dogs, specially trained service animals that helped vulnerable witnesses feel safe enough to participate in the legal system. The moment she'd seen a facility dog working with a child victim, she'd known this was her calling. Kane had been 2 years old when they matched him with Rachel, a rescue dog who'd been returned to the shelter 3 times because he was too calm, too quiet, not playful enough. What those families had seen as defects, the facility dog trainers recognized as gifts. Kane had an almost supernatural ability to sense fear and meet it with peace. He didn't demand attention, he offered sanctuary. Their training had been rigorous, 18 months of classes, certifications, scenarios. Kane learned to remain calm during emotional outbursts, to ignore distractions, to position himself for maximum comfort to the person he was helping. Rachel learned to read Kane's subtle signals, to advocate for trauma-informed courtroom procedures, to fight a legal system that still didn't fully understand how animals could facilitate justice. Now, standing outside the victim services office, Rachel centered herself. Through the observation window, she could see Prosecutor David Kim, Detective Sarah Martinez, and Judge Sullivan watching a small figure in the next room. Rachel's heart clenched when she saw Emma Rodriguez through the glass. The child sat motionless, clutching a worn stuffed rabbit, her eyes vacant. Rachel had seen that look before, the soul-deep shutdown that happened when reality became too terrible to process. Some children screamed their pain. Others, like Emma, simply disappeared inside themselves. "Thank you for coming," Judge Sullivan said, opening the observation room door. "I know this is unusual." "Every case is unusual," Rachel interrupted gently. "That's what makes them human. What can you tell me about Emma?" David Kim stepped forward, his exhaustion evident. The night of the incident, Emma's father, Marcus Rodriguez, came home drunk. He'd lost his job that week, and his wife Sophia had suggested maybe it was time to separate. He snapped, beat her unconscious in front of Emma. Then he wrapped his hands around Sophia's throat and choked her until she stopped moving. Emma watched everything. Rachel felt Kane press against her leg, his way of offering her support. She needed it. "Sophia played dead until Marcus passed out," David continued. "Then she whispered to Emma to run and hide. Emma spent 4 hours in a closet before police arrived. When they found her, she was catatonic, hasn't spoken since." 43 days of silence, Detective Martinez added. "Multiple therapists, specialists, child advocates, nobody's been able to reach her." Rachel knelt beside Kane, her hand on his neck. "May we see her?" Judge Sullivan nodded. "The room's ready. We'll watch from here, but take all the time you need." Rachel and Kane entered the victim services office through a different door. The room was designed to be non-threatening. Soft colors, comfortable furniture, toys scattered about. But Emma sat rigid on her plastic chair, clutching that rabbit like it was the only real thing in a world that had betrayed her. Rachel didn't speak. She simply sat on the floor about 6 feet away, Kane settling beside her with a soft sigh. They created a picture of peace, making no demands, expecting nothing. Just present, just safe, just there. The minutes ticked by. Rachel focused on her breathing, on radiating calm. Kane did what he did best, existed with the kind of gentle, accepting energy that asked nothing and offered everything. Then Emma's head turned. just slightly, just enough to acknowledge their presence. Rachel's heart soared, but she remained still. This was Cain's moment. This was what he was born to do. Cain waited, patient, eternal, a golden angel in a world that had shown this child only darkness. Emma's fingers loosened on the rabbit. The toy slipped slightly in her lap. Her small hand reached forward, trembling, seeking something her traumatized mind couldn't name but her wounded soul recognized. Trust, safety, hope. Rachel looked at Cain and gave the gentlest nod. Go ahead, boy. Cain stood with careful grace and walked toward Emma. Each step was measured, giving her time to object, to retreat, to refuse. But Emma didn't pull back. Her hand stayed extended, waiting. When Cain reached her chair, he sat directly in front of her and simply waited. His brown eyes held no judgment, no expectations, just infinite patience and unconditional acceptance. Emma's fingers touched his fur. And in that moment, Rachel Morrison knew what everyone watching from behind the glass knew. Something impossible was about to happen. A child who had forgotten how to trust was remembering. A voice that had been stolen by violence was preparing to speak. Cain had built a bridge across the chasm of trauma. Now they just had to help Emma find the courage to cross it. The courtroom of Judge Margaret Sullivan was filling with a tension so thick it seemed to press against the walls. Court reporter Linda Vasquez had worked in this building for 22 years, and she'd never felt an atmosphere quite like this. Her fingers rested on the stenography machine, but they trembled slightly. She transcribed murder confessions, death penalty cases, and crimes that haunted her dreams. But something about a 3-year-old witness made her question whether justice should demand such courage from someone so small. Bailiff James Crawford stood by the door, his usual stoic expression cracking around the edges. He had 5 grandchildren. The youngest was 4. Every time he thought about Emma Rodriguez sitting in that witness area, he pictured his own granddaughter Lily, with her gap-toothed smile and her obsession with princess dresses. What would remain of Lily's innocence if she'd witnessed what Emma had seen? All non-essential personnel have been cleared, James announced to Judge Sullivan, his voice rougher than usual. Just immediate family, the legal teams, and required court staff. Good, the judge replied, reviewing her notes one final time. She'd made special accommodations for this testimony, dimmed the harsh overhead lights, removed the American flag that cast intimidating shadows, brought in a comfortable cushion for Emma to sit on instead of the witness chair. The courtroom needed to feel less like a courtroom and more like a space where a traumatized child might possibly feel safe enough to speak. But would it be enough? In the gallery, Sofia Rodriguez sat in the front row, flanked by her sister Maria and her mother Elena. Sofia's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She'd applied makeup that morning to cover the faded bruises, but nothing could hide the haunted look in her eyes, the look of a woman who'd stared death in the face and survived only because her monster had passed out before finishing the job. "Mija, drink some water," Elena whispered, pressing a bottle into Sofia's trembling hands. Sofia couldn't. Her throat felt closed, strangled by guilt and fear and a desperate, aching love for her daughter. For 2 years she'd made excuses for Marcus. His drinking wasn't that bad. His temper was just stress from work. His hands around her throat were just a one-time thing, and he'd been so sorry afterward, so tearfully apologetic. Until the night apologizing turned into killing. "I should have left sooner," Sofia whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Emma shouldn't have to do this. She shouldn't have to relive." "Stop," Maria interrupted firmly, gripping her sister's hand. "You did leave. You're testifying against him. You're protecting Emma now. That's what matters." Across the aisle, Marcus Rodriguez sat at the defense table, his posture radiating false confidence. He wore an expensive charcoal suit purchased by his parents, the kind of suit designed to make jurors forget about the monster underneath. His dark hair was freshly cut, his face clean-shaven. He looked like a successful businessman, not a man who'd beaten his wife unconscious and choked her in front of their toddler. His attorney, Robert Chen, was reviewing documents with practiced efficiency. Robert was 53 years old and had been a defense attorney for 28 years. He believed in the principle that everyone deserved representation, even people he personally found reprehensible. And he found Marcus Rodriguez deeply reprehensible. Robert had 3 daughters. When Marcus had first described the night in question, dismissing it as Sophia being dramatic, and the kid probably doesn't even remember, Robert had excused himself to vomit in the courthouse bathroom. But he had a job to do. The system required that he provide the best defense possible, even for clients who made his skin crawl. "Remember," Robert whispered to Marcus, "show no emotion, no reactions to anything Emma says. The jury isn't here today, but everyone in this courtroom will be watching you." Marcus nodded, his jaw tight. "That dog thing is ridiculous. It's manipulation. You should object." "We've already tried. Judge Sullivan ruled it's a reasonable accommodation for a traumatized minor." Robert's voice was flat. "Besides, objecting makes us look like we're afraid of what a 3-year-old might say." Behind the prosecution table, David Kim arranged and rearranged his notes for the 5th time. His colleague, Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Lopez, touched his arm. "David, breathe. You're prepared. More importantly, Rachel and Kane are prepared." "What if it doesn't work?" David asked quietly. "What if Emma can't speak? Without her testimony, Marcus walks on the assault charges. He'll be out in 2 years, maybe less. And Sophia and Emma will spend the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders." Jennifer had no answer, because David was right. Detective Sarah Martinez entered through the side door, taking her seat behind the prosecution. She'd been the responding officer that night. She'd found Emma in that closet, small and silent and shaking. She'd carried the child out into the flashing lights of emergency vehicles, while paramedics worked frantically on Sophia's barely breathing body. Sarah had worked hundreds of domestic violence cases. Most victims went back to their abusers. Most cases never made it to trial, but this one was different. Sophia had pressed charges and never wavered, and now, somehow, impossibly, a 3-year-old might be the one to finally tip the scales toward justice. Judge Sullivan's clerk, Patricia Moore, stepped to the front. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Margaret Sullivan." The courtroom stood, the rustle of clothing sounding thunderous in the tense silence. Judge Sullivan entered, her black robe settling around her like protective armor. She'd been a judge for 17 years. She'd overseen thousands of cases, but this one would stay with her forever, regardless of the outcome. "Please be seated," she said, her voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of emotion. "Before we begin, I want to remind everyone present that we are about to hear testimony from a 3-year-old child who has experienced severe trauma. I expect absolute decorum. No outbursts, no emotional reactions, no sounds of any kind. Is that understood?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the courtroom. "Mr. Kim, is the witness ready?" David stood, his hands gripping the table. "Yes, Your Honor. Officer Rachel Morrison is prepared to bring Emma Rodriguez and facility dog Kane into the courtroom." Sophia's breath caught. Maria squeezed her hand so hard it hurt. Marcus stared straight ahead, his face a careful mask of neutrality. Judge Sullivan nodded to the bailiff. "Bring them in." James opened the side door, and the courtroom collectively held its breath. This was the moment everything changed. The side door opened with a whisper of hinges that sounded like thunder in the absolute silence of the courtroom. Every eye fixed on that doorway. Every breath was held. Every heart beat in synchronized anticipation of what was about to unfold. Kane entered first. The golden retriever moved with the grace of something far more than a dog. He carried himself like a guardian angel wrapped in fur, his service vest catching the dimmed courtroom lights. His brown eyes scanned the room with calm assessment, noting the tension, the fear, the desperate hope hanging in the air like fog. He'd felt this atmosphere before in 73 other cases, but each time carried its own unique weight. Behind him, Officer Rachel Morrison walked slowly, her hand resting lightly on Kane's back. And beside Kane, taking the smallest, bravest steps of her short life, came Emma Rodriguez. Sophia's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob. Her baby looked so tiny in the vast courtroom, dwarfed by the wooden benches and legal furniture that seemed designed to intimidate. Emma wore a simple pink dress with white flowers, her favorite, the one Sophia had bought her for her 3rd birthday, back when life still held joy instead of terror. The child's hand was buried completely in Kane's thick fur, her small fingers gripping tight enough to turn her knuckles white. Her other arm clutched the worn, stuffed rabbit against her chest. Her eyes stayed fixed on the floor, refusing to look at the faces watching her, especially refusing to look at the defense table where her father sat. "Easy, baby, easy," Rachel whispered, so softly only Emma could hear. "Kane's got you. Nobody's going to hurt you here." They moved across the courtroom at Emma's pace, which meant glacially slow, each step a victory over paralyzing fear. James Crawford, the bailiff, found himself blinking back tears. He'd seen hardened criminals swagger into this room without a care, but watching this tiny child force herself forward with nothing but a dog for courage absolutely destroyed him. Judge Sullivan leaned forward slightly. "Take your time, sweetheart. There's no rush." Emma didn't acknowledge the judge's words. Perhaps she didn't hear them. Perhaps she was too far inside her own head, reliving that terrible night, feeling phantom hands around her mother's throat, hearing the sickening sounds of violence that no child should ever witness. Rachel guided Emma to the witness area. Normally, witnesses sat in an elevated chair, looking down at the courtroom. But Judge Sullivan had approved modifications. A soft blue cushion had been placed on the floor beside the witness box, creating a safe space where Emma could sit with Kane, away from the intimidating formality of the witness stand. Emma sank onto the cushion and Kane immediately lay down beside her, his body pressed against hers. The child leaned into him, burying her face in his neck, and for a long moment nobody spoke. They simply waited, letting Emma adjust to the room, the people, the weight of what was being asked of her. Prosecutor David Kim approached slowly, his movements careful and non-threatening. He knelt several feet away, making himself smaller, less imposing. "Hi, Emma," he said softly. "My name is David. Do you remember me? We met once before at the hospital." No response. Emma's face stayed hidden in Kane's fur. David glanced at Rachel, who gave him an encouraging nod. "Continue. Be patient." "Emma, I know this is scary," David continued, his voice gentle. "But you're very safe here. Nobody's going to hurt you. Kane is here to help you feel brave. And your mommy is here too. She loves you very much." At the mention of her mother, Emma's head lifted slightly. Her eyes searched the courtroom and found Sophia in the gallery. Mother and daughter locked gazes, and something passed between them. A connection forged in survival, in trauma, in love that persisted despite everything. Sophia mouthed the words, "I love you, baby." Emma's lip trembled, her grip on Kane tightened. David saw the opening and pressed forward carefully. "Emma, can you tell me your name?" Silence. The kind of silence that feels heavy, oppressive, like a blanket smothering all hope. "That's okay," David said quickly. "Let's try something easier. Do you know why you're here today?" Nothing. Emma stared at her mother, then at Kane, then at the floor. Her small body trembled. "Can you tell us about your house? Do you remember your house?" Still nothing. The child had retreated back inside herself, to that safe place where words didn't exist and memories couldn't touch her. David felt desperation creeping in. He looked at Judge Sullivan, then at Rachel, silently asking, "What now? What else can I try?" Robert Chen, the defense attorney, remained perfectly still at his table. He wanted to feel relieved that Emma wasn't speaking. It would help his client's case. But instead, he felt sick. This child's silence wasn't a legal victory. It was a tragedy playing out in real time. Marcus Rodriguez, however, allowed himself the smallest smile. The kid wasn't going to talk. He was going to walk. His parents had been right. Children that young couldn't be reliable witnesses anyway. Another year or two and Sophia would come crawling back. They always did. David Kim was about to stand, about to tell Judge Sullivan that they'd tried their best, but Emma simply couldn't testify, when something extraordinary happened. Emma shifted on her cushion, turning away from the courtroom and toward Kane. She pressed her forehead against his and her lips began to move. At first, no sound emerged, just the shape of words without voice. Then, in the absolute silence of that courtroom, a whisper escaped, so soft that everyone leaned forward, straining to hear, afraid to breathe lest they miss a single syllable. "The doggy is nice." The courtroom froze. Time itself seemed to stop. Linda Vasquez's fingers hovered over her stenography machine, shaking so badly she could barely type. Judge Sullivan's hand gripped her gavel but didn't move. Sophia's tears flowed freely now, streaming down her face in rivers of relief and anguish. Emma continued, her voice a fragile whisper directed only at Kane, as if she was telling the dog a secret. Not like the yelling man. Marcus Rodriguez's smile vanished. His face went pale. Robert Chen's pen slipped from his fingers and clattered to the table, the sound impossibly loud in the frozen courtroom. "The yelling man was mean," Emma whispered to Kane, her small hand stroking his soft ears. "He hurt Mommy." Every person in that courtroom understood they were witnessing something beyond testimony, beyond law, beyond procedure. They were watching a child's soul crack open and release the poison that had been killing her from the inside. And it was happening because a golden retriever named Kane had built a bridge across the chasm of her trauma. Judge Sullivan's voice cracked as she whispered to the court reporter, "Are you getting this?" Linda nodded, tears streaming down her own face, her fingers flying across the keys. Emma wasn't done. The dam had broken, and 3-year-old words tumbled out in fragments, each one a piece of nightmare finally expelled into the light. The courtroom remained frozen, every eye on the tiny girl and the gentle dog who'd given her the courage to speak the unspeakable. Emma's whispers to Kane grew stronger, each word a small act of defiance against the silence that had imprisoned her for 43 days. Her voice remained soft, childlike, broken by 3-year-old grammar, but in the hushed courtroom, every syllable rang clear as a bell. "Mommy was on the floor," Emma said, her fingers tracing patterns in Kane's golden fur. "She was crying, red stuff on her face." Sophia's body shook with silent sobs. Her mother Elena wrapped both arms around her, holding her together as she threatened to fall apart. Maria gripped Sophia's hands so tightly their fingers had gone white. David Kim remained kneeling, frozen in place, afraid that any movement might shatter this miraculous moment. His heart hammered against his ribs. After weeks of dead ends and silence, Emma was finally speaking. He didn't dare interrupt, didn't dare ask a single question. This wasn't traditional testimony. This was a child's raw truth, unfiltered and devastating. "The yelling man pushed Mommy down," Emma continued, her voice catching. She pressed closer to Kane, drawing courage from his steady breathing. "He was saying bad words, really loud bad words." Judge Sullivan's knuckles were white where she gripped her bench. In 17 years on the bench, she'd maintained perfect judicial composure through the most horrific testimony imaginable. But this, watching a baby describe her mother's near murder, was testing every ounce of her professional restraint. Detective Sarah Martinez sat behind the prosecution table, remembering the crime scene. The blood splattered on the living room wall, Sophia's unconscious body on the floor, the overturned furniture, the smell of alcohol and violence that had permeated the entire apartment. And somewhere in a closet, this tiny child had hidden, listening to everything, understanding that Mommy was in danger but unable to help. "Mommy's face was all wrong," Emma whispered, and the childish phrasing somehow made it more horrifying. Her eyes were closed. She wasn't moving. Marcus Rodriguez shifted in his seat, just slightly, just enough that Robert Chen placed a warning hand on his client's arm. Don't react. Don't give them anything to use against you. But Marcus's carefully constructed mask was cracking. Beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. His breathing quickened, because his 3-year-old daughter was describing, in devastating detail, the night he'd tried to murder her mother. Emma's small body trembled against Cain. The golden retriever remained perfectly still, his presence the only anchor keeping the child from drowning in her memories. Rachel Morrison sat nearby, her own eyes wet with tears, watching Cain do what he did best, give a broken child the strength to survive their own truth. The yelling man's hands were on Mommy's neck, Emma said, and her own small hands moved to demonstrate, wrapping around her own throat in a gesture that made everyone in the courtroom flinch. Squeezing and squeezing, Mommy's face got purple. "Jesus Christ," James Crawford whispered under his breath, forgetting his bailiff composure entirely. His hand unconsciously moved to his own throat, imagining the terror Sophia must have felt, the helplessness Emma must have experienced watching it happen. Jennifer Lopez, seated beside David at the prosecution table, wiped her eyes. She'd read the police reports. She'd seen the crime scene photos. She'd interviewed Sophia in the hospital where she'd spent 3 days recovering from strangulation injuries and a severe concussion. But hearing it from Emma's innocent voice made it real in a way that evidence photos never could. "Mommy made a scary sound," Emma continued, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "Like she couldn't breathe, like when I had the coughing sickness and couldn't breathe good." Sophia's silent sobs became audible. She buried her face in her mother's shoulder, her body racked with the memory of hands crushing her windpipe, of consciousness slipping away, of the certain knowledge that she was dying and her baby was watching. "Then Mommy stopped moving," Emma said. "She was just on the floor, all quiet. I thought—" The child's voice broke entirely, and she buried her face in Cain's neck. Her small shoulders shook with tears she'd been holding inside for 43 days. The courtroom remained frozen. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Everyone understood they were witnessing something sacred and terrible, a child's trauma being transformed into testimony, pain being alchemized into justice. Cain, sensing Emma's distress, shifted slightly and licked her cheek. The gentle gesture gave her the strength to continue. "I thought Mommy was dead," Emma finally whispered, speaking the words that had haunted her nightmares. "I thought the yelling man killed her." Marcus Rodriguez stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous. She's 3 years old. She doesn't—" "Sit down," Judge Sullivan commanded, her voice sharp as a whip. "Mr. Rodriguez, sit down immediately or I will have you removed from this courtroom." Robert Chen pulled his client back into his seat, whispering urgently, Shut up right now. You just made everything worse." But Marcus's outburst had done something unexpected. Emma's head snapped toward the defense table, and for the first time she looked directly at her father. Their eyes met across the courtroom, and the little girl's face transformed. Fear became recognition. Recognition became clarity. Her whisper rose to a voice, small but clear, audible to every person in the room. "That's him. That's the yelling man who hurt Mommy." The words landed like a bomb. David Kim's breath caught. Judge Sullivan's hand flew to her chest. Detective Martinez felt tears stream down her face. Even hardened court reporter Linda Vasquez had to pause her transcription because her hands were shaking too badly to continue. Emma wasn't done. The floodgates had opened and everything poured out. "Mommy opened her eyes a tiny bit," Emma said, still looking at her father with an expression far too knowing for a 3-year-old. "She whispered so quiet. She said, 'Run, baby, hide.' So I ran. I ran to the dark place, the closet where we keep the blankets. I hid with Bunny and I was so scared." Her voice grew even smaller, more fragile. The yelling man was walking around looking for me. I heard him calling, "Emma, come out. Daddy's sorry." But Mommy said hide, so I stayed in the dark place. I stayed until the lights came, red and blue lights, and the nice police lady found me. Sarah Martinez recognized herself in that description. The nice police lady who'd opened that closet door and found a traumatized child clutching a stuffed rabbit, her eyes wide with shock, her clothes spotted with her mother's blood. Emma turned back to Kane, exhausted from the effort of speaking. She wrapped both arms around the dog's neck and buried her face in his fur. "I was so scared," she whispered one final time. So scared." The courtroom remained frozen for several seconds that felt like hours. Then Judge Sullivan spoke, her voice thick with emotion. "We'll take a 15-minute recess. Mr. Kim, Mr. Chen, please approach the bench." As people slowly began to move and breathe again, one thing was abundantly clear to everyone present. They had just witnessed something extraordinary. A 3-year-old child, with nothing but a golden retriever's gentle presence for courage, had spoken truth to power in the most devastating way possible. And the courtroom would never be the same. The 15-minute recess stretched into 25 minutes as David Kim and Robert Chen stood at Judge Sullivan's bench, their voices low but urgent. In the gallery, Sofia Rodriguez sat surrounded by family, unable to stop crying. Her daughter, her brave, broken, miraculous daughter, had just done the impossible. "I want to see her," Sofia whispered to her sister Maria. "I need to hold my baby." "Not yet," Maria replied gently, though her own face was streaked with tears. "Let Rachel take care of her right now. Emma needs calm, not more emotion." In the victim services room down the hall, Rachel Morrison sat on the floor beside Emma, who had finally fallen asleep against Kane's side. The child's face, even in sleep, showed the exhaustion of someone who'd carried mountains and finally set them down. Her small hand remained tangled in Kane's fur, unwilling to let go of her lifeline even in unconsciousness. Rachel stroked Kane's head, her own emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "You did it, boy," she whispered. "Number 74, you reached her." Kane's tail thumped softly against the carpet, but his eyes never left Emma's face. He understood, in whatever mysterious way dogs understand, that his job wasn't finished yet. This child would need him for a while longer. Back in the courtroom, the conversation at the bench was reaching its conclusion. Robert Chen's face had gone from confident to resigned to something approaching relief over the past 20 minutes. "Your Honor," Robert said quietly, "I need to confer with my client. Based on what we've just witnessed, I believe there may be an opportunity for resolution without proceeding to trial." Judge Sullivan's eyebrows rose. "Are you suggesting a plea agreement, Mr. Chen?" "I'm suggesting that continuing to trial would be unnecessarily traumatic for all parties involved, especially the child witness. If the prosecution is amenable to discussing terms." David Kim felt a surge of cautious hope. "What kind of terms are we talking about?" "That's between my client and myself first," Robert replied. "But I think we can find something acceptable to all parties. May I request a 1-hour recess?" Judge Sullivan looked between the two attorneys. She'd been a judge long enough to read the writing on the wall. Emma's testimony, raw, unrehearsed, and utterly devastating, had destroyed any chance the defense might have had. A jury would have convicted Marcus Rodriguez in less than an hour. Robert Chen was smart enough to know when to negotiate and when to fight. 1 hour, the judge agreed. "We'll reconvene at 11:30. As the attorneys returned to their respective tables, whispers rippled through the courtroom. Sofia watched Marcus's face carefully. His mask had completely shattered. He looked pale, shaken, trapped. Good. He should feel trapped. He should feel exactly how she'd felt with his hands around her throat. Robert Chen leaned close to his client. "We need to talk, in private now." They moved to a small conference room adjacent to the courtroom. The moment the door closed, Robert turned on Marcus with barely controlled fury. "Do you understand what just happened in there?" Robert demanded. "Your 3-year-old daughter just gave the most damning testimony I've heard in 28 years of practicing law. She described, in explicit detail, watching you beat and strangle her mother. She identified you. She described your actions. And she did it with an authenticity that no jury in the world would question." Marcus's hands shook. "She's 3, she doesn't understand." "She understands everything," Robert's voice rose. "She understands that you're the yelling man who hurt her mother. She understands that she hid in a closet for 4 hours terrified you'd find her. She understands that you turned her entire world into a nightmare." Marcus slumped in his chair, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a costume. The confident businessman facade had crumbled entirely, revealing the broken, violent man underneath. "If we go to trial," Robert continued, his voice cold, "you will be convicted, not might be, will be. The jury will see that video of Emma's testimony. They'll see that little girl holding onto a dog for courage while she describes watching you try to murder her mother. You'll get the maximum sentence, 15 to 20 years. "So what are you saying?" Marcus asked, his voice hollow. "I'm saying we negotiate a plea deal. Right now. We accept responsibility, we plead guilty to aggravated assault, and we ask for the minimum sentence. Maybe 8 years, maybe less with good behavior. It's your only option." Marcus stared at the table. His parents had spent $50,000 on Robert's fees, on the suit, on expert witnesses who would never testify now. They'd told him to fight, to deny everything, to paint Sophia as a liar. But they hadn't counted on Emma. None of them had counted on a 3-year-old finding the courage to speak. "Do it," Marcus finally whispered. "Negotiate the deal." 20 minutes later, both legal teams were back at Judge Sullivan's bench. David Kim presented the terms. Marcus Rodriguez would plead guilty to aggravated assault, attempted murder, and child endangerment. He would accept a sentence of 8 to 12 years in state prison. He would agree to a permanent restraining order protecting Sophia and Emma. He would surrender all custody and visitation rights. In exchange, the prosecution would recommend the lower end of the sentencing range and drop the additional charges related to violating his bail conditions. "Does your client accept these terms, Mr. Chen?" Judge Sullivan asked. "He does, Your Honor." "And the prosecution?" David looked back at Sophia in the gallery. She was staring at him, her eyes asking the question, "Is it enough? Will my daughter be safe?" David nodded to Sophia, then turned back to the judge. "The prosecution accepts, Your Honor." Judge Sullivan allowed herself the smallest smile, the first smile anyone had seen from her all day. "Then let's make it official. Bring Mr. Rodriguez forward." 10 minutes later, Marcus Rodriguez stood before the bench, his right hand raised, admitting to crimes he'd spent weeks denying. His voice shook as he said the words "guilty" 3 times. When the judge asked if he understood he was giving up his rights as a father, he could barely whisper, "Yes." Sophia watched from the gallery, her mother's arm around her shoulders. It wasn't perfect justice. 8 to 12 years wasn't enough for what he'd done. But it was something. It was protection. It was time for her and Emma to heal without looking over their shoulders. When the hearing concluded, David Kim immediately went to the victim services room to tell Rachel and Sophia the news. He found Emma still sleeping against Cain, her small face peaceful for the first time in weeks. "It's over," David told Rachel quietly. "He took the plea. Emma won't have to testify again. She won't have to see him again. It's over." Rachel's eyes filled with tears of relief. She looked down at the sleeping child and the gentle dog who'd saved her. "You hear that, Emma?" she whispered, though the child couldn't hear. "You did it. You were so brave, and now you're safe." In that moment, everyone understood that justice had taken an unusual form. It hadn't come from forensic evidence or expert witnesses or legal arguments. It had come from a 3-year-old girl whispering the truth to a golden retriever who helped her remember that not all the world was violent and cruel. Sometimes the smallest voices speak the loudest truth. And sometimes courage wears a service vest and has 4 paws. 3 weeks after Marcus Rodriguez was sentenced to 10 years in state prison, Judge Margaret Sullivan sat in her chambers writing an opinion piece she never thought she'd compose. The words flowed easily, powered by the memory of a 3-year-old girl finding her voice in the presence of a golden retriever. The American justice system was built for adults, she typed, but it must serve children too. And children who have experienced trauma need more than our laws and procedures. They need bridges back to trust. Sometimes those bridges have 4 legs and a gentle heart. Her article, titled Facility Dogs and the Future of Trauma-Informed Justice, would be published in the National Law Journal the following month. Within 6 months, it would be cited in courtrooms across 17 states. But Judge Sullivan didn't know that yet. She only knew that Emma Rodriguez had changed her forever, had reminded her why she'd become a judge in the first place, to protect the vulnerable and give voice to the voiceless. Down the hall, Prosecutor David Kim was presenting a proposal to District Attorney Michelle Torres. He'd compiled statistics, case studies, and budget projections for expanding the facility dog program across the entire county. "Look at these numbers," David said, spreading documents across Michelle's desk. "In jurisdictions with facility dog programs, victim cooperation increases by 43%, case resolution rates improve by 37%, and most importantly, psychological outcomes for child witnesses improve dramatically. These kids aren't just testifying, they're actually beginning to heal." Michelle studied the numbers carefully. The DA's office was already stretched thin, and adding 2 more facility dogs meant 2 more handler salaries, training costs, veterinary expenses. But she kept returning to one statistic: a 90% success rate in helping traumatized children participate in the justice system. "How much are we talking about?" Michelle asked. "Approximately $150,000 per year for 2 additional dog handler teams. But Michelle, the conviction rate alone would justify the cost. We're losing cases because victims and witnesses are too traumatized to participate. We're watching abusers walk free because children can't find the courage to speak. That changes with facility dogs." Michelle set down the documents and looked at David directly. "You know the Rodriguez case affected you personally. Are you sure this is about the program and not about that one little girl?" David didn't hesitate. "It's about both. Yes, Emma changed me. Watching her whisper the truth to Cain, seeing her find courage she didn't know she had, it reminded me why we do this job. But it's not just about Emma. It's about the next Emma and the one after that and every traumatized child who deserves a chance at justice and healing." Michelle was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled. "Write up a formal proposal. I'll take it to the county board next month. We'll get you your dogs." David felt emotion surge through him: relief, joy, hope. "Thank you, you won't regret this." "Make sure I don't," Michelle replied. "And David, get Rachel Morrison involved in the training program. She clearly knows what she's doing." At that very moment, Rachel Morrison was sitting in the waiting room of Bright Horizons Child Therapy Center with Cain at her feet. They'd been visiting Emma twice a week since the trial, part of the child's ongoing trauma therapy. Dr. Lisa Park, Emma's therapist, had requested Rachel and Cain's presence during sessions. Emma still found it easier to talk with Cain nearby. "She's doing remarkably well," Dr. Park had told Rachel during their last meeting. "Most children with this level of trauma take months or years to start processing verbally. Emma's already making incredible progress, and it's directly connected to her bond with Cain. He helped her learn that trust is still possible." Today's session was different. Sophia Rodriguez would be joining them, the first time mother and daughter would participate in therapy together since the trial. The goal was to help them begin rebuilding their relationship, to address the guilt Sophia carried, and the confusion Emma felt about why Mommy hadn't been able to protect her that night. The therapy room door opened, and Dr. Park beckoned them inside. Emma sat on a bean bag chair, coloring, but her face lit up when she saw Kane. "Doggy," she called out, her voice so much stronger than it had been 3 weeks ago. Kane padded over to Emma, and she immediately wrapped her arms around his neck. "Hi, Kane, I missed you." Rachel's heart swelled, complete sentences, clear speech, eye contact. This was a different child than the silent, traumatized girl she'd first met. Sophia entered next, her hands nervously clutching her purse. She'd been in therapy too, both individual sessions and a support group for domestic violence survivors. The physical bruises had healed, but the emotional scars ran deeper. The hardest part was forgiving herself for staying with Marcus as long as she had, for exposing Emma to violence, for not protecting her baby. "Hi, sweetheart," Sophia said softly, kneeling a few feet from Emma. Emma looked up from her coloring, then back at Kane, then at her mother. "Hi, Mommy." The simple greeting made Sophia's eyes water. For weeks after the incident, Emma had barely acknowledged her mother, some part of her child's mind associating Sophia with danger and fear. But slowly, with therapy and time, their bond was mending. "Emma," Dr. Park said gently, sitting on the floor near the bean bag, "do you remember what we talked about last time? About how sometimes mommies can't protect their children from bad things, even though they want to?" Emma nodded, still holding Kane. "Would you like to tell Mommy anything about that night? Anything at all?" Emma was quiet for a long time. Then, still holding Kane but looking at her mother, she said, "You tried to protect me. You told me to run and hide. You saved me." Sophia broke down completely. She moved forward and wrapped her arms around Emma, careful not to squeeze too tight, afraid of scaring her. "I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry you had to see that. I'm sorry I didn't leave sooner. I'm sorry." "It's okay, Mommy," Emma interrupted, her small voice matter of fact. "The yelling man is gone now. The nice judge said so. We're safe now." The simple faith in those words, "we're safe now," shattered and healed Sophia simultaneously. Her daughter, at 3 years old, was already more resilient than Sophia had ever been. Emma was choosing to believe in safety again, to trust again, to move forward. "That's right, baby," Sophia whispered, holding her daughter close. "We're safe now." Rachel watched the reunion with Kane sitting calmly beside her, his tail wagging slowly. This is why they did this work. Not for the convictions or the statistics or the recognition. For moments like this, when broken families began to piece themselves back together, when traumatized children rediscovered hope, when justice meant more than punishment. Dr. Park caught Rachel's eye and smiled. They both understood they were witnessing something beautiful, the beginning of true healing. That evening, Rachel Morrison sat at her kitchen table filling out paperwork for 2 new facility dog candidates. David Kim had called with the news. The county was funding expansion. Within 6 months, there would be 3 dog handler teams working with traumatized witnesses across Riverside County. Kane lay at her feet, already asleep after a long day of being a hero. Rachel reached down and scratched behind his ears, grateful beyond words for this remarkable animal who taught her that healing often comes on 4 paws. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. Emma asked when she can see Kane again. She drew him a picture. "Thank you for giving my daughter her voice back." Rachel smiled, her eyes misty. She typed back, "We'll visit Friday. Kane can't wait to see Emma's picture. Give her a hug from both of us." 1 case, 1 child, 1 dog. But the ripples were spreading outward, changing policies, changing perspectives, changing lives. And somewhere in a small apartment across town, a 3-year-old girl who'd once been silenced by trauma was falling asleep peacefully, finally believing that tomorrow would be better than yesterday. 6 months after Marcus Rodriguez was led away in handcuffs, The morning sun streamed through the windows of a small two-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood on the safe side of Riverside. Yellow walls, Emma's choice, brightened the living room where Sofia Rodriguez was hanging streamers for her daughter's 4th birthday party. "Higher, Mommy. The purple one needs to be higher," Emma called out from the couch, her voice filled with the kind of bossy joy that only a 4-year-old can muster. She wore a bright yellow dress with sunflowers on it, and her hair was pulled back in 2 pigtails tied with matching yellow ribbons. Sophia laughed, adjusting the streamer. "Like this, boss lady." "Perfect," Emma clapped her hands, then returned to the most important task of the day, making a special birthday card for Kane. The apartment was modest but filled with light and love. Sophia had spent the last 6 months rebuilding their lives from scratch. She'd completed a domestic violence recovery program, secured a job as a receptionist at a pediatric clinic, and slowly transformed this apartment into a real home, not a place haunted by violence and fear. Pictures decorated the walls now. Emma at the park, Emma at preschool, Emma with her grandmother, and prominently displayed on the mantel, a photo of Emma hugging Kane the day after the trial, both of them looking peaceful and content. "When is Kane coming?" Emma asked for the 15th time that morning. "In 1 hour, sweetheart. Officer Rachel said they'd be here at 2 o'clock. Emma returned to her card, carefully drawing a golden dog with a rainbow over his head. Her fine motor skills had improved dramatically, just one of many areas where she'd shown remarkable progress. Dr. Park said Emma was exceeding every developmental milestone for a child who'd experienced her level of trauma. The nightmares had decreased from every night to maybe once a week. The sudden moments of panic, triggered by raised voices or unexpected movements, were becoming rare. Emma was learning to be a child again, to play without fear, to laugh without looking over her shoulder. The doorbell rang and Emma's eyes went wide. "Is it Kane?" "Let's find out." Sophia opened the door to reveal Rachel Morrison standing with Kane at her side. But they weren't alone. Behind them stood Judge Margaret Sullivan, Prosecutor David Kim, Detective Sarah Martinez, and Dr. Lisa Park, all the people who'd helped Emma find her voice and her safety. "Kane!" Emma shrieked, launching herself at the golden retriever. Kane's tail wagged furiously as the little girl wrapped her arms around him. "I missed you so much. I made you a card, and Mommy made you special dog cookies." Rachel laughed, watching the reunion. Kane had visited Emma a dozen times over the past 6 months, but each greeting was like the first, pure joy and unconditional love. "Happy birthday, Emma," everyone chorused as they entered the apartment. The party was simple but perfect. Chocolate cake with vanilla frosting, Emma's favorite, pizza, balloons, and a pile of presents that made Emma's eyes go wide. But the best gift came from an unexpected source. Judge Sullivan knelt beside Emma, a wrapped box in her hands. "This is from me, sweetheart, but it's also from a lot of other children who are going to be helped because of you." Emma carefully unwrapped the gift, a children's book titled The Brave Little Voice. She opened it and gasped. The main character was a little girl with pigtails who looked remarkably like Emma, and beside her was a golden dog who looked exactly like Kane. "Is this me?" Emma asked, her eyes wide. "It's inspired by you," Judge Sullivan explained. "Your story, how you found courage with Kane's help, has changed things, Emma. Because of you, other scared children will have dogs like Kane to help them be brave too. This book will help them understand that they're not alone." David Kim stepped forward. "We now have 3 facility dog teams working in Riverside County. Kane helped us understand how important these dogs are, and it all started because one very brave little girl whispered the truth." Emma hugged the book to her chest, then looked up at all the adults gathered around her. "Other kids get dogs like Kane." "Yes," Rachel said, her voice thick with emotion. 2 new dogs just finished their training. Their names are Luna and Bear. They're going to help children just like Cain helped you." Emma's face lit up with understanding beyond her years. "So other kids won't be so scared." "That's right, honey," Sophia said, pulling her daughter close. "You helped other children by being so brave." Detective Sarah Martinez wiped her eyes. She'd worked hundreds of cases, but none had affected her like Emma's. She'd recently volunteered to work specifically with the facility dog program, wanting to be part of something that actually healed victims instead of just processing their trauma. As the party continued, Emma played with Cain while the adults talked quietly. Dr. Park shared updates on Emma's progress. Judge Sullivan discussed her upcoming speaking engagements about trauma-informed justice. David showed everyone the county's new training manual for working with child witnesses. Cain's picture was on the cover. At one point, Emma's grandmother, Alina, pulled Sophia aside, tears in her eyes. "Look at her," Alina whispered, watching Emma laugh as Cain gently took a treat from her hand. "6 months ago, we didn't know if we'd ever hear her laugh again. And now—" "I know," Sophia said, her own tears flowing freely. "She's going to be okay. We're both going to be okay." As the afternoon sun began to set, casting golden light through the yellow walls, Emma climbed onto Sophia's lap while Cain rested his head on her small feet. Rachel snapped a photo, the three of them looking peaceful, safe, loved. "Mommy," Emma said quietly. "Yes, baby. When I grow up, I want to help kids like Cain helps kids. I want to make them not scared anymore." Sophia kissed her daughter's forehead, overwhelmed by the resilience of this tiny human who'd survived the unthinkable and emerged wanting to help others. "You can be anything you want to be, sweetheart, and you'll be amazing at it." Emma smiled, snuggling deeper into her mother's arms, while Cain's gentle presence anchored them both. Around them, the apartment buzzed with conversation and laughter, the sounds of life being lived instead of merely survived. Judge Sullivan caught Rachel's eye across the room and raised her water glass in a silent toast. Rachel touched Cain's head and smiled back. They both understood what they were witnessing, not just a birthday party, but a celebration of healing, justice, and hope. The courtroom had frozen the day Emma spoke to Cain, but time had started moving again, carrying this brave little girl and her mother toward a future that held promise instead of fear. The nightmare was over. The healing had begun. And somewhere in a state prison, Marcus Rodriguez would have 10 years to think about the daughter whose courage had brought him to justice. But this story wasn't about him anymore. It was about Emma, about a 3-year-old who became 4, who found her voice in the gentleness of a golden retriever, who learned that broken things can heal, and who already dreamed of helping other broken children find their way back to the light. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Emma made one final request. "Can Cain stay just a little longer?" Rachel looked at Sophia, who nodded with tears in her eyes. "Of course, sweetheart. Cain can stay as long as you need." Emma curled up on the couch with Cain, her birthday book in her lap, her eyes already drooping with exhaustion. Within minutes, she was asleep, peaceful, safe, loved. And in that moment, everyone understood that justice wasn't just about courtrooms and verdicts. It was about a little girl sleeping without nightmares. It was about a mother rebuilding her life. It was about a dog who'd built a bridge across trauma. It was about new beginnings. And sometimes, that's the greatest victory of all. The end.